On that stuffy Monday morning, the classroom of Monteverde State School was louder than usual. Students shouted, laughed in groups, and threw paper at each other as if it were just another endless routine within the peeling walls and the desks carved with names and broken hearts. At the back of the room, sitting in the last seat, was Daniel. Thin, in simple clothes, with a worn-out notebook in front of him and a timid gaze that avoided anyone else's eyes. He wasn't the popular student. He wasn't the athlete everyone admired, nor the funny one who made the class laugh. He was just the invisible boy, the easy target for jokes and whispers. Mr. Almeida, a middle-aged teacher with a rigid posture, entered the room carrying his worn leather briefcase and a severe look. The class slowly went silent, not out of respect, but out of fear. Almeida was known for his harsh temper, his inability to forgive mistakes, and a certain cruel pleasure in pointing out weaknesses. "Open your books to page 142, he ordered without greetings. While the students flipped through their books, Daniel stayed still. Not because he didn't want to learn, but because his book was incomplete, missing pages, the result of an old donation. He tried to disguise it, glancing at the sides, copying discreetly from the girl in front. But Almeida, like a predator smelling fear, noticed. "You there, Daniel?" His voice echoed through the room, dripping with disdain. Read the text out loud. A chill ran down the boy's spine. He opened the book, found torn pages, and with a trembling voice muttered, "Professor, my book. It's missing that part." The class burst into giggles. Some mocked his stutter. Others whispered, "Always this useless kid making excuses." Almeida crossed his arms and slowly approached, as if savoring the humiliation. "Missing that part?" he repeated, raising his voice. "Or missing capability?" Daniel lowered his head. The shame burned more than any slap could ever hurt. "Listen well, all of you." Almeida raised his tone, turning the lesson into a cruel spectacle. "This one here is the perfect example of someone who will never be anybody in life. A complete failure. If he can't even read a simple page, imagine facing the real world out there." The words cut Daniel from the inside. He felt the laughter of his classmates like invisible stabs. Some looked at him with pity, others with malice, but all of them, without exception, believed in the teacher's sentence. And at that moment, something was born inside him. Not just pain, not just anger, a flame, a silent promise. He didn't know how nor when, but he swore to himself that one day he would prove them all, and especially Almeida, wrong. The rest of the class passed in a blur. Daniel could barely hear the words, only repeating in his mind the sentence that would mark him for years. "You will never be anybody." But what no one knew was that this moment would become the turning point of his entire life. That invisible boy, humiliated in front of the class, would one day return, not as the rejected student, but as a millionaire CEO. The days following that episode were pure torment for Daniel. The label of failure echoed through the hallways, and there wasn't a single recess when some classmate didn't mock him. "Hey, Daniel, don't forget the missing pages," some shouted, while others just snickered quietly whenever he walked by. The weight of humiliation wasn't only in what he heard, but in how it seemed to confirm what everyone already believed, that he was invisible, irrelevant, and destined for nothing. At home, things weren't much different. Daniel lived with his mother, Helena, a seamstress who spent entire nights at her sewing machine, trying to scrape together enough to keep the house afloat. His father had abandoned the family years earlier, and Daniel grew up without a paternal figure to guide him. Maybe that's why Almeida's words hurt even more. Deep down, he felt he had something to prove, not just to the teacher, but to the entire world. Helena, despite the hardships, was the only one who believed in her son. "You have a light inside you, my boy," she often said whenever she saw Daniel with his head down. But even with all her love, poverty hit hard. Many times there weren't new books, proper clothes, or even enough food for every day. Meanwhile, Mr. Almeida became a constant shadow in Daniel's life. For him, teaching wasn't just about passing on knowledge, it was about marking territory, making clear who was in charge and who was beneath him. He believed only the strongest would survive, and that humiliating students was a way of teaching. To many, he was a rigorous educator. To Daniel, he was an executioner. Over time, Daniel withdrew. He spoke little, avoided calling attention, and always sought the last seat in the classroom. But inside, an entire universe of ideas boiled. While others saw just a lost boy, he dreamed. He dreamed of escaping the small town, of making it in life, of building something so grand that no one would ever dare laugh at him again. The turning point came when Daniel met Marcos, the school librarian whom few valued. Marcos was a simple, middle-aged man, living among dusty books and forgotten stories. Unlike Almeida, he didn't see a failure in Daniel, but rather someone curious, and he was the one who showed Daniel a new world. "Do you like business stories?" Marcos asked one afternoon, noticing that Daniel was always drawn to the economics books nobody touched. I don't know much about that," Daniel replied timidly. "You should. Stories of men who started with nothing and built empires. Maybe you'll see yourself in them." And so, among dusty shelves and quiet conversations, Daniel plunged into the biographies of great entrepreneurs. He read about men and women who faced bankruptcies, humiliation, and disbelief, but who never gave up. The more he read, the more he realized the world wasn't defined by what others said about him, but by what he would do with his own life. Helena, noticing her son's interest, did everything she could to encourage him. She bought used notebooks, found old magazines, and even saved coins so he could print some articles from the public library's internet. It wasn't much, but for Daniel, it was fuel. Meanwhile, Almeida continued ridiculing him. During exams, he made sure to read Daniel's low grades out loud. In classroom discussions, he would say things like, "Pay attention, class. This is what happens when someone has no discipline. This will be your fate if you don't make an effort, to end up like Daniel." But what the teacher didn't realize was that each word of contempt didn't kill Daniel. On the contrary, it made him stronger. Slowly, he stopped reacting with tears and started transforming pain into determination. The key characters in his life were now set. Daniel, the rejected student, carrying within him a burning desire to prove his worth. Helena, the warrior mother, who despite limitations always saw a bright future for her son. Mr. Almeida, the antagonist, whose arrogance would become fuel for the turning point years later. Marcos, the librarian, the spark of inspiration who introduced Daniel to the possibility of dreaming big. The past had planted seeds of pain, but also of strength. Daniel didn't yet know how nor when, but deep inside he began to write his silent promise. One day he would return. And when he did, it wouldn't be as just another ordinary man. He would return as someone capable of silencing every laugh that once echoed through those hallways. He would return as a CEO. The years passed like pages of a book quickly turned, but Professor Almeida's words remained engraved in Daniel's mind as if they had been spoken yesterday. "You will never be anybody." That sentence, spat out in front of the whole class, followed him through his teenage years and became the driving force behind his choices. After struggling to finish high school, Daniel knew he couldn't rely on his family's resources. Helena, his mother, was already worn out from so much work, and the money barely covered the bills. So he started looking for small jobs: workshop assistant, bakery attendant, office helper. Each role seemed too simple, but in each one he learned something he stored away for the future: the importance of discipline, customer service, and organization. But the real turning point came when he landed an internship at a small tech company. The pay was low, his colleagues didn't take him seriously, and often treated him as if he were invisible. Yet Daniel saw something beyond that environment: a practical school of business. He carefully observed how the owners made decisions, how projects were organized, how mistakes were corrected. He didn't have a voice there, but he had sharp eyes and a mind that absorbed everything like a sponge. And it was during this time that the resentment returned with greater force. Every time he felt ignored, Daniel remembered Almeida's laughter and his classmates' ridicule. It was as if the past had shaped his lens. He could not accept continuing to be treated as a nobody. At that company, he met two people who would become essential. The first was Clara, a brilliant programmer as passionate about technology as he was about business. The second was Henrique, a creative young man who worked in the marketing department. The three of them formed an unlikely friendship, united by their dissatisfaction with how management treated them. Daniel began sharing his dreams with them. One day, we're going to create something of our own, something big, something that will make these people swallow their laughter. Clara laughed but believed in him. Henrique, more skeptical, said, "That takes money, and you know we don't have any." "We don't need much to start," Daniel insisted. "We need vision." And vision was something he had in abundance. Over time, Daniel realized the world was changing fast. The internet, management software, startups that emerged out of nowhere and won over investors. He read everything he could, studied at night, watched lectures, and printed old articles from the library just as he had since school. Meanwhile, his personal life grew harder. Helena became ill, increasing the pressure on him. Many times, Daniel went straight from the hospital to work, exhausted but unbreakably determined. It was during this period that his silent thirst for revenge turned into a purpose. He didn't just want to succeed. He wanted to silence all the voices that had said he would never be anything. Above all, he wanted to prove to himself that he could. The first step happened almost by accident. He and Clara developed a small app to organize simple tasks, initially for internal use at the company. But the project, dismissed by management, caught the attention of some clients. Enrique, with his marketing skills, helped spread the idea in forums and social media. Within months, what seemed like a side project started to gain real users. When management found out, they ridiculed the project. "You think you're going to change the world with this?" mocked one of the partners. "There are dozens of apps like that already." But Daniel didn't flinch. He remembered Almeida. He remembered the laughter. And he thought, how many times have they already said I would never be anything? That was when, with courage and a fair dose of recklessness, he decided to leave the company and bet on his own business. Clara and Henrique went with him. They had no money, but they had determination. They worked in cafes, borrowed offices, often pulling all-nighters. The beginning was brutal. Lack of resources, debts, investors who didn't believe in them. But Daniel, driven by the memory of his humiliations, refused to give up. Each no became fuel, each criticism motivation, and little by little the company began to grow. A small contract here, another there, an unlikely partnership that worked out. Within a few years, what began as a discarded idea inside a company became a recognized startup. But even as it grew, Daniel never forgot where he came from. The resentment still followed him, like a constant shadow. He knew something was still missing. The moment to return and face those who had once called him a failure. Time had transformed the boy humiliated in the back of the classroom into a determined man, and Daniel was now recognized as the founder of a promising startup. The app that had once been dismissed as useless in his previous company had gained strength, attracted thousands of users, and caught the attention of major investors. But Daniel knew this was only the beginning. In his mind, the true goal wasn't just financial success. It was something deeper. To build something so solid that it could sustain the weight of the silent revenge he had carried since his school days. Not revenge in the sense of destruction, but of proof. Proof that he had been right to believe in himself when no one else did. In the modern office he had rented, Daniel gathered Clara and Henrique almost every night. The space was always filled with whiteboards covered in scribbles, colorful post-its stuck to the walls, and laptops glowing with graphs and numbers. Clara was the technical brain, developing every detail of the app, while Henrique expanded the brand and negotiated partnerships. But Daniel was the driving force, the one who saw the future. One night, Clara looked at him and asked, "Daniel, why do you push yourself so hard? I know this isn't just about money." He took a deep breath, leaned back in his chair, and for a moment, drifted back in time. "Because one day, someone told me I would never be anybody, and I'm going to prove they were wrong." Clara smiled, not pressing further. Henrique, however, seemed intrigued. He could sense there was something darker behind Daniel's determination. The preparation for the future was relentless. Daniel woke up early, read reports, studied case studies of successful companies, and mapped out expansion strategies. He knew the business world was a silent war where anyone who faltered was devoured. But he also realized he had a unique weapon: pain transformed into resilience. As the company grew, invitations to events and conferences began to arrive. At first, Daniel hesitated, but soon he understood that this was where he would build authority. Each time he stepped onto a stage and spoke about his journey, he felt stronger. He didn't share the details of his humiliation, but he let slip sentences that revealed his essence. Never let someone else's opinion define who you are. Slowly, his figure became a source of inspiration. Articles began to circulate about the young entrepreneur who came from nothing. Investors became interested in buying stakes in the company. Daniel, cautious, chose carefully. He didn't just want money. He wanted strategic partners who could accelerate growth. It was in this context that an opportunity appeared, one that would change everything. A major business conference was scheduled in the city where he had grown up. It was a prestigious event, bringing together entrepreneurs, professors, politicians, and the press. Clara brought the news, excited. "Daniel, they want you as the keynote speaker." He froze for a moment. That city, that place, it was where it had all begun, where Almeida's ghost still lived in his memory. "It's the perfect chance, Danielle," Henrique said. "You'll show everyone who you've become." He closed his eyes for a second. More than an invitation, it was a calling. The moment to confront his past had arrived. The following months were filled with relentless work. Daniel wasn't just preparing a speech, he was crafting a narrative that would leave everyone in awe. He knew he didn't need to attack anyone directly, but he could use his story as a mirror. Meanwhile, Clara and Henrique noticed his intensity. It was as if this opportunity mattered more than any investment round. "Are you ready to go back there?" Clara asked one night as the office sat in silence. "Not just ready," he replied, staring at the glowing screen. "I've been preparing for 20 years. Deep down, he knew. That stage would be the battlefield where he would finally bury the words that had haunted him. And as if fate wanted to dramatize things further, an unexpected detail reached him. Professor Almeida, now retired, had been invited as an honoree of the event, celebrated for the impact he had on generations of students. Daniel smiled, not with joy, but with a cold satisfaction. The kind of smile from someone who realizes life writes better scripts than any human mind could. The plan was set. He would return, not as the boy who once left humiliated, but as the man who had achieved the impossible. And in front of Almeida, in front of everyone, he would show that the cruel prophecy had been wrong all along. The auditorium was packed. More than 500 people filled every available seat, and the atmosphere vibrated with anticipation to hear some of the biggest names in the business world. Giant screens projected the conference logo, and live broadcast cameras captured every detail. The entire city was talking about the event. Backstage, Daniel adjusted his tie. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was like armor for the battlefield. Clara watched him with proud eyes, while Henrique tried to ease the tension with jokes. But Daniel barely listened. His heart was racing, not from fear, but from anticipation. On the other side of the auditorium, sitting in the front row, was Professor Almeida. His hair was now completely white, his face marked by the wrinkles of time. He wore an old but well-pressed suit. The event was honoring him for years dedicated to education. Many former students were present, murmuring praise and memories. He seemed to enjoy the attention, but still carried in his gaze that same arrogant glint Daniel knew so well. When the Master of Ceremonies announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of one of the country's most promising startups, Daniel Martins." The auditorium erupted in applause. Daniel walked onto the stage with firm steps, the lights surrounding him like a beam of destiny. He took a deep breath, faced the audience, and began. "Good evening. It's an honor to be here, in the city where I grew up, in the place that shaped much of who I am today." The audience listened in absolute silence. He continued, modulating each word with precision. "When I was just a boy, sitting in a classroom not far from here, someone looked me in the eye and said, 'You will never be anybody.'" A murmur rippled through the auditorium. Some laughed uncomfortably. Others frowned. And in the front row, Almeida shifted in his chair, surprised. Daniel pressed on without wavering. I could have believed it. I could have given up. But every word of humiliation, every laugh that echoed that day became the fuel that brought me here. People leaned forward, hooked by the story. It was impossible not to feel part of it. He projected an old photo onto the screen. His school class. Young Daniel, sitting in the back, timid, eyes cast downward. The room murmured. Many recognized the setting. Some even remembered the teacher. That image shows a boy nobody believed in, but today, that boy is here to say that no one has the right to limit another person's future. Applause broke out instantly, but Daniel raised his hand, asking for silence. "I'm not here to expose anyone. I'm here to show that when you believe in yourself, no humiliation can stop you from growing." Almeida, however, couldn't take it. He stood slowly, asking for the microphone. The host, hesitant, handed it to him. The audience held its breath. "I never meant to hurt you," Almeida began, his deep voice now unsteady. "Back then, I believed harshness built character. If I said those words, it was to push you to be better." Daniel stared at him, serious as the audience murmured. Many looked at Almeida with disapproval. "Push to be better?" Daniel repeated, his anger controlled but his tone firm. "Humiliation doesn't teach. Contempt doesn't motivate. You didn't push me to be better, you only tried to break me." The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Clara and Henrique watched tensely from backstage. "But I learned something," Daniel continued. "I learned that we don't have to bow to the expectations of those who don't believe in us. I learned that true strength is born when we're treated as nobodies, but choose to become somebody." The words struck like hammer blows. Almeida, visibly uncomfortable, tried to argue, "If you became who you are today, maybe part of it is because of me." Daniel smiled, a cold, almost painful smile. "No, Professor. I became who I am in spite of you." The audience erupted in thunderous applause. Some stood up. Others shouted words of support. The contrast was brutal. The old honored teacher, now shrinking under the weight of his own arrogance, and the former student, now a millionaire CEO, lifted up by the crowd's recognition. Daniel then closed his speech with a phrase that would never be forgotten. "Never underestimate the power of words. A word can destroy dreams, but it can also reignite hope. Today, the words that echo aren't the ones that told me I would never be anybody. They're the words I say now. You can be everything you believe in." The auditorium exploded into a standing ovation. Almeida lowered his head, defeated by the weight of his own story. Daniel, on the other hand, finally felt free. The confrontation was over. When the audience finally calmed down, Daniel took a deep breath. He believed that moment would be the climax of his journey, exposing, with elegance, the wound opened years ago. But destiny, as always, had kept one last surprise. The master of ceremonies approached to close Daniel's speech, but someone stood up in the middle of the audience. It was a woman with graying hair, discreet glasses, and an old notebook in her hands. Her face carried a sense of urgency. She walked toward the stage under the curious gaze of the crowd. "I need to speak," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "My name is Helena, and I was a teacher at the same school where Daniel studied." Another heavy silence fell. Daniel watched her cautiously. He didn't remember her very well, but something in her expression showed she had been following the story closely. "Everyone here applauds his journey," she continued, "but there's something you all need to know." She raised the notebook she carried, an old diary with yellowed pages. "I kept notes, year after year, of what happened at the school, because I believed one day someone would need to hear the truth." The crowd murmured. Almeida frowned, visibly unsettled. "It's all written here," she went on, opening the diary. Professor Almeida didn't humiliate only Daniel. He made a habit of destroying students' self-esteem. He used to say it was for their own good, but I saw many drop out of school because of it. Daniel felt a shiver run down his spine. Suddenly, his story wasn't just about him anymore. It was about dozens of voices that had been silenced. Helena flipped through the pages and read aloud. March 14th. Professor Almeida ridiculed student Patricia in front of the class. She cried the entire day and never came back to school. June 2nd. He called student Roberto useless because he couldn't answer a question. He dropped out the following month. Each line cut through the air like a blade. The audience reacted with outrage. Murmurs of shock, expressions of reproach, even tears appeared. Almeida tried to defend himself, standing up once more. "This is absurd. I was preparing those kids for the real world." But the reaction was immediate. A wave of boos swept through the auditorium. For the first time, he no longer had control of the narrative. Daniel then took the microphone again. His voice, calm, contrasted with the storm around him. "Professor Almeida, maybe the real world is harsh, yes, but it's not a teacher's role to destroy dreams to prove that. A teacher's role is to inspire. You didn't build futures, you stole them." The words landed like hammer blows. Almeida, now pale, looked smaller than ever. Helena closed the diary and handed it to Daniel. "This record belongs to you. You are proof that the seed of contempt may try to suffocate a dream, but it can also fuel determination." Daniel received the diary with steady hands. It felt like holding not just his own story, but the story of everyone who had suffered in silence. He turned to the audience and declared, "This diary is not about revenge, it's about justice. And so, today, I announce the creation of a foundation to support young people who have faced humiliation, bullying, or any form of discouragement. No one should ever give up on themselves because of someone else's cruelty." The audience rose once more, in thunderous applause. But this time, it wasn't just for him. It was for every student who never had the chance to return. As Almeida left the auditorium with his head down, almost fleeing the crowd, Daniel understood. True victory wasn't proving that he had become someone, but turning his pain into hope for others. That was the final chapter, a twist that not only closed his cycle of humiliation, but opened the path to a legacy greater than any company could ever represent. The auditorium was on its feet, clapping so intensely that the applause echoed like thunder within the hall. Daniel stood on stage, holding Helena's diary against his chest as if it were more precious than any award he had ever received. The cameras captured every detail, his steady expression, his tear-filled eyes, the deep breaths of a man who had walked through hell and returned stronger. As the audience began to settle down, Daniel approached the microphone and, in a serene yet deeply emotional tone, declared, Today is not about revenge. It's about liberation. I freed myself from the words that chained me for years. And I want each of you to know, no one has the right to tell you who you are or how far you can go. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was as if everyone was absorbing the truth that now filled the air. He took a deep breath and continued. Professor Almeida once told me I would never be anyone. Today, I look back and realize that true victory is not in my success, but in the choice not to let those words define my destiny. A close-up showed his determined face, illuminated by the stage lights. Daniel then raised the diary for all to see. This diary is proof that many before me suffered in silence, and I want to make sure that never happens again. That's why, starting today, my foundation will be a refuge for those who have been told they weren't capable. I want them to find not only support, but also a reminder: someone's opinion is not the sentence of your life. The audience erupted once more in applause, this time accompanied by tears, embraces, and reflective glances. Even journalists covering the event were visibly moved. Offstage, Clara and Henrique embraced. They knew Daniel had won more than just a personal battle. He had turned his pain into a weapon of collective transformation. As the ceremony drew to a close, Almeida slipped out through the side door. His steps were heavy, his once imposing figure now hunched, almost invisible. There was no longer an audience to sustain him. No voice left to echo, only silence and regret. Daniel, on the other hand, left the stage carried by the energy of the crowd. Many wanted to shake his hand, others asked for pictures. But what struck him most was the number of young people who approached simply to say, "Thank you. You spoke for me." That night, sitting in his office, Daniel gazed at the illuminated city through the window. He placed the diary on his desk and reflected. This was not just a story of success, it was a story of survival. He recalled all the times he had thought about giving up, the moments he believed Almeida's words might have been true. But here he was, alive, strong, and determined, proving that the greatest victory of all was never stopping believing in himself. With a tired but satisfied smile, he whispered to himself, "Let this be only the beginning." And in silence, he closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he truly felt at peace.